Hello, everyone. I hate to break you away from that great jazz with some Depression era vibes, all played on a synthetic turntable. We can hear the scratching of the needle. That's a great effect. I hope everyone is doing well and they had a good weekend. This weekend was, of course, pretty depressing from a news standpoint, at least. On Saturday, we were greeted with news of yet another mass shooting. These things are part of the fabric of American life at this point. This one was particularly horrific. There was, of course, video being passed around Twitter of a man stepping out of a car and going right at it. He was also, as these things go, they're using very high-powered firearms to attack innocent people who are completely unaware of the situation. Then today, or at least I heard news of it today, I guess it happened this morning, there was a similarly horrific incident in which some people who looked like they were migrants or laborers, maybe illegal immigrants, whatever you want to call them, who were sitting at a bus stop or waiting for something, and they were mowed down by a car. And that one was especially horrific, and was horribly, I guess, fit for propagation on Twitter, the video, that is. We never want to jump the gun on any of these things, no pun intended on that one. These are developing stories. For instance, the incident that occurred today might very well have been unintentional, might have been a horrible accident or a drunk driving or drugged while driving accident. It certainly, from the video that I saw, looked intentional, but videos can be deceiving. And so we should always be very cautious in jumping to conclusions on all of these things. I think it's hard to imagine the Allen, Texas mall shooting was not intentional. Yes, it was clearly a mass murder. The perpetrator was killed in the process, thankfully, but not before he has murdered or had murdered. I don't even know what the number is. I heard that some people were in critical condition. Let's say 10 to a dozen people, and certainly terrified many more than that. One thing that needs to be said about this is that many people last night did jump the gun. I didn't say anything about the matter, and I'm not sure I really had anything punchy and relevant to say. It is rather ridiculous to just, gawk at these things, or it's, I shouldn't say ridiculous. It's rather distasteful to gawk at these things and then, give them your thoughts and prayers. And again, they're developing stories. We just simply don't know what happened outside of the immediate facts, and it is unwise to opine. But of course, I did see that many of the usual right wing suspects were picking up on the fact that the perpetrator was Hispanic, might have been a gang member of some kind. There was a rather curious tattoo that he had on his hand, might have been his left hand. Again, I don't know what to make of it. I actually, as many of you know, I actually grew up in Dallas, Texas. I don't know if I've ever been to Allen, Texas. I probably have, or at least driven by it. It is north of Plano. Plano is a massive suburb that's 45 minutes, hour and a half away from Dallas. Who knows? I might have been at that mall at some point in my life. The tattoo on his I guess his hand did resemble the Dallas Public School District tattoo. Now, anyone in this space can definitely correct me on these things. Maybe we just simply don't know. I've heard other people say that it was a gang tattoo or that it was a random auto body shop tattoo. I mean, we don't know. I mean, when I see people with tattoos, my first question often is, what on earth were you thinking getting that incoherent nonsense permanently etched onto your skin? So who knows? Maybe we shouldn't make that much of it. There's also news, as you have probably heard, of the perpetrator wearing a right-wing death squad patch, the RWDS patch. You've seen that among Proud Boys and those types of people. Now, what to make of it? I actually will make something of that, but before we even talk about it, we should put forward these, caveat emptor in the sense of who knows what this is. This was an intentional act, obviously, but it could have been intended by all sorts of different things. Almost by definition, if you engage in this level of spectacular, theatrical, nihilistic, vengeful violence, you are mentally ill. There is no rhyme or reason to doing something like this. So, could this just be some crazy patch that he wore? Certainly it could be. Might it tell us something about his motive? Might this character be someone similar to the Buffalo shooter? That is someone who gained his intentions online, who over the course of the pandemic was a 4chan user and radicalized and put out a manifesto of basically copy-paste 4chan memes, but was engaging in political violence. I'm not sure that a incident like the Columbine shooting, which occurred in the 90s, I'm not sure that is political violence per se, although it's kind of sub-political. There is a political component to it. You could kind of think of these kids as the kind of dark, goth, socially alienated kids who were lashing out at the jocks. I think that was a clear component of it. And to that extent, there was a political tinge to the event, even though, again, it's not political violence in the way that, say, terrorism often is directly political. We are doing this because we want Israel out of the West Bank, for instance. You're a suicide bomber in some kind of bloody campaign. Those are directly political acts. I think a lot of these are sub-political. The Buffalo shooter was also political, like terrorism. He had an intention. It was the desire to put some numbers up on the scoreboard, to put it into the most brutal language possible. It was, I'll take out 12 of them, and he won that day in his twisted mind. It was political. Now, this one might have been so as well. And what I saw from most of, let's just say, right-wing Twitter is the first off last night was the claim that, oh, look, it's an illegal immigrant. We've got to do something about the illegal immigration problem. The border is out of control. You know, fair enough on those sentiments. But you could tell that they in themselves were almost kind of glad to see something like this. Like this is something that could really be used to further their agenda of, say, solving the illegal immigration issue or just attacking Joe Biden. I think the latter is almost their primary motivation. Then, when there is news breaking about the perpetrator's interest in social media, in neo-Nazism or right-wing stuff, they flip to how could this person be a white supremacist, and then they'll show a photo of him and he's clearly Hispanic. I think that those people saying those things are being rather delusional. And it's interesting how when a white murderer does something for a specifically political reason, they'll kind of fall over themselves of, oh, well, this is a mental illness issue and you can't blame the right for this or so on. They have no solution to the mental illness problem, or they'll say something even more ridiculous, which is that we need more guns in schools or security guards everywhere and so on. It's worth noting that this perpetrator might very well have been a security guard. So that at least raises some doubts in those presumptions. There is a broad trend of Hispanics moving rightward in the United States. And I'm, of course, not even coming close to suggesting that they're all spree shooters or whatever, but that's a background factor. So Donald Trump is lambasted most often for being anti-Hispanic. He's kind of, much like a lot of the alt-right and what preceded the alt-right, he's taken up the Southern strategy for Republican electioneering, but he substituted Hispanics for blacks. So previously, it was all about, we don't want to go to school with African Americans. We certainly don't want one dating our daughters. So we're going to vote Republican and move to the suburbs and join a Christian school and lower taxes and stop busing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's almost a kind of new version of that where Hispanics are plugged into this. You can see this with someone like Tucker Carlson and the Great Replacement Theory, or his version of it, where Hispanics, they're gang members, they vote left, and they are displacing native-born Americans. And that includes whites, of course, but the true victim are African Americans. So they've kind of substituted Hispanics into the meme, and then blacks become like a victim of this new Southern strategy that they are pursuing, I think rather unsuccessfully. Donald Trump has just been, practically speaking, unsuccessful in pursuing this as a strategy, and it's why talk about the wall and all that kind of stuff have, to a very large degree, gone by the wayside. You still hear it, but it's de-emphasized. And the reason for that is that Donald Trump, surprise, surprise, did better among Hispanics than Mitt Romney had in 2012. He did better among African Americans as well, and that continued to increase in the 2020 election. In fact, he created new voters, and many of those were Midwestern whites who voted for Barack Obama once or twice. But he actually did better. He did worse among whites as a whole than Mitt Romney did. That is, his proportion of the white vote went down in 2016 from where Romney was in 2012. And that's a remarkable thing, because we hear over and over from the mainstream media, Donald Trump is a white nationalist candidate. Well, he's not very good at pursuing white nationalism if you judge him by the numbers. This is a fascinating fact. It is sometimes mentioned by the mainstream media, but they certainly dwell on the rhetoric and not the actual numbers. So I don't doubt that Hispanics as a ethnicity or as a people are shifting rightward. That 60-40 breakdown among them, I think, is going to probably go to 50-50. I think it might go to 40-60 at some point in favor of the Republican Party. And all of this Trump-era electioneering and all the kind of Tucker Carlson or VDare stuff about how Hispanics are destroying the country, that they're going to have to dampen that pretty seriously. Breitbart was another one that was doing this for a time. I think they're going to do a lot less of it. Additionally, if you know anything about the online right, the idea of an Hispanic, in fact, a noticeably Hispanic person being a white supremacist shouldn't really come as some great surprise. And I would say this, the Hispanic designation, it obviously, it came about in the Nixon administration. It means, are you using the Spanish language? There's so much variation in the Hispanic community. I wonder if that moniker isn't all but useless. There are certainly people who would be called Hispanics who, you couldn't distinguish from myself, and yet they are Hispanic, and I'm not. I mean, it's a curious designation. I won't dwell on that, but if you are involved in the online right, it won't surprise you at all to see non-white people effectively being white supremacist, or being kind of like white supremacist e-grifter, the Ian Michael Chong type characters who are, from far off lands in Asia, needless to say, don't quite fit the bill in terms of Aryan beauty, but spend all of their day, in effect, race baiting. So none of that is actually terribly surprising. I don't want to make any firm conclusions, to reiterate, in the sense that this right-wing death squad thing might have just simply been, random, or he didn't know what it meant, or it's a silly joke, or who knows. But I don't think it is absolutely not out of the question that he was motivated in the same way that the Buffalo shooter was motivated. And that is actually a fascinating phenomenon that is worth discussing. Obviously, there's the gun rights issue, the just prevalence of guns, particularly in Texas. There's the online despair and nihilism. Those are real serious things that are worth talking about. We can talk about that if you'd like. But I do think it's interesting how, particularly the way in which anonymous right-wing Twitter caters in a way to the non-white, white supremacist fanatic. That you can put up an avatar of whomever, an anime character, a vintage photo, a photo of some blonde, Conan the Barbarian type, while you live in Malaysia, or while you are not quite close to being Hispanic. These are interesting subjects and worth talking about. So let me let some people in who have requested. All right, Charles. I'm usually the one commandeering your Twitter Spaces, but now I'm returning the favor.
Turnabout is fair play. I should note that, I don't think the timing of these shootings is unlinked from the prosecution of the Proud Boys.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, I've long suspected, and, there are other people in this space as well who agree with me on this, that many of these instances of mass shooting, mass violence are linked to geopolitics. So, for instance, I believe the Russian sanctions were passed basically the same day as the Sandy Hook shooting, rather famously. And it does seem as if we have among us certain people that are mentally ill, mentally disturbed, and that they have in fact been made that way by
Hmm.
easy availability of drugs. You know, there was a story in Bloomberg most recently about how a lot of marijuana is leading to high instances of schizophrenia. You know, I'd be happy to post that on the jumbotron. Similarly, what was going on at the same time as the shooting in Buffalo was the sort of investigation and inquiry by the State Department into the Israelis killing the Palestinian American journalist Abu Akleh. I think that's how you say her name. Who was assassinated in the in the course of doing her journalistic duties. And there was a request at the time at the State Department about the Israelis bringing to justice the sniper who shot him, shot in the head, shot her in the head. And of course, the Israelis refused to do that. And so I think there's actually quite a number of these situations, historically speaking, that are in fact retaliation by foreign governments on the contact, or basically what our deep state is doing. And I think that that's sort of something that we need to take seriously as sort of like that we are maybe in fact in a kind of war in which our mentally ill people are being used against us, to basically create more chaos, more uncertainty, and so forth. I think it's worth noting, Gavin McInnes spent a lot of time in Israel, who is, of course, the founder of the Proud Boys. Enrique Tarrio's family had a long history of right wing violence in Cuba, something that he actually told me about and bragged about, that his family had executed various communists in the old country. Um,
Wow.
so I think there's something that needs to be sort of understood in that context. And of course, Gavin McInnes's brother, Kyle McInnes, lived in Israel for a spell, actually trained with Israeli officers and so forth. So I think there's a certain sense in which this club might ultimately have descended into a gang generally, right? So we sort of need to kind of think in those terms. Whether the McInneses set out to do that, right? I take them at their word that they were just trying to create a fun little club for like young men, like the Elks Lodge or something like that. But there's a certain
I don't take him at his
well, I
word
don't
for
either
that. I think that's
necessarily, but
completely
let's just say
ridiculous.
that I did, right? So I don't know. I
Okay.
don't know what I think about it. It's sort of too horrifying for me to think that like I met Gavin McInnes and like he was my friend, and it's very horrifying for me to think that he might be engaged in that kind of thing. But I suppose it is well possible, right? So let's 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 caveat that like you may be right and I might be too naive on this. Like let's just
You are. I'm sorry, but you are. It's what it correctly
Well,
presents.
yeah, I know, but he's hold on.
yeah. So
I agree with you, but he's making a point. So
yeah,
let him
so
finish.
let's put it aside. You may be well. I followed what you were saying the last time when you did the Proud Boys analysis, and I think you're probably right about that. My sense, though, is
Yeah.
that whatever it started as, what it became was a kind of paramilitary group to overthrow the U.S. government. And I suspect we have a lot of these things within our country. And it does seem as if, the if you follow the Merrick Garland, history, his career, the sort of efforts to crack down on a lot of these white nationalists, paramilitary groups that existed in the 1990s, and you see, oh, lo and behold, we have this crazy 9/11 moment, which gives us like 20 years of the U.S., futzing about in the Middle East, essentially outsourcing all of our intelligence gathering to other Middle Eastern countries, namely Israel and the Likud Israelis. You do sort of start to wonder if perhaps there's something very larger, something much more systemic going on here. Um,
Yeah.
and I've got to say, I think that it's not lost on me that like the Flight 93 essay written by Michael Anton, who goes to work for Mike Flynn and then later General H.R. McMaster at the National Security Council, it's not lost on me that he was also a speechwriter for Rudy Giuliani, and he's now, of course, engaged with the Claremont folks as well. So this idea of storm the Capitol, storm the cockpit, just cause a ruckus, it's very similar to like what we're seeing with these mass shooters, where these guys are encouraged to quote unquote take action. And you and I have sort of been around a lot of these right wing circles ourselves, and I will tell you, like, I've seen this up close and personal, where there are lots of people who will justify this violence in different ways. Um, Including people that really should know better, and who actually want to see the U.S. descend into a kind of race war of a sort. And it's very disturbing, to put it mildly.
Yes. Okay, let me do this. I feel like I want to go back into the Proud Boys because you raised it. These things are coinciding now. Whether they're linked
I should say too,
causally,
the last person I saw wearing a right wing Death Squad pin or whatever, a patch. The last person I saw wearing that was at the 2016 convention for Donald Trump, and he was going to a Proud Boy party later in the day. So
yeah.
I
And
just I'm not
interestingly,
I'm not here to smear anyone. I'm just I'm saying what I saw with my own two eyes, right? So like people can make of
it,
that what they will.
interesting, yeah, and interestingly, the person who I first heard that term uh, that come out of her mouth was actually Ann Coulter. Now, I doubt she invented it, but she was at, I believe it was like the 2014 CPAC. So this is pre-Trump, and she was on stage with Mickey Kaus, who I guess is still her partner in podcasting, and she said something, well, at some point, we're going to have right wing death squads to go kill all the people who wrecked the country. And that was a huge applause line. And, just right wing bait, which she is very good
And let's
at.
not forget that the Proud
And
Boys did security for quite a number of her events, right?
yes, and she was defending them very, very late. She was like, she would use the term glorious Proud Boys. And she and McGinnis have had, I don't know how linked they are, but they certainly are on friendly terms. So there is something here. Let me say this: we have two other people who want to ask questions. I usually use that term. Let's put a bookmark in it. I'm gonna put a bookmark in my discussion of the Proud Boys, and I'm gonna return to it. But these guys have been waiting, so why don't we go to Vic, a Dark Brandon fan, first? You can ask your question,
Yes.
and Hi.
Hey, yeah. So first of all, I want to say this off the bat. Like, I'm from the left. I don't know as much about the right wing as you guys do. And the reason I sometimes join your spaces, Richard, is like it's fascinating to me because you can bring this almost inside scoop. So I appreciate that. I wanted to thank you for that
Sure.
knowledge. So I wanted to touch on a couple things. First, I wanted to talk on. I wanted to refer to what you were saying earlier about the Hispanic vote. So you're right that it has drifted rightward, but at the same time, like a lot of people way over exaggerate this because like Donald Trump did not get close to even George W. Bush's 2004 Hispanic numbers, right? So even in 2020, Biden, who got the like a really low number for a Democrat as president, he still got 63% of the Hispanic vote. And last year in the midterms, Democrats got about 62%, 61% nationally. But if you take out Florida, they actually got about 68%. So it's a
Interesting.
lot more. Yeah, it's a lot more nuanced and a lot more like detail than a lot of people would say. And specifically, what the reason I always tell people when you look at the Hispanic vote, you have to look at Florida separately because in Florida, 2/3 of the Hispanics are Cubans. In the rest of the country, 2/3 of the Hispanics are Mexicans, and that's a massive. Political and demographic difference that is just kind of papered over. And you're 100% right,
Right.
by the way. I was like, this term Hispanic is just useless. And fun fact, the reason it exists is because of the U.S. Census Bureau back in the 1840s after the Mexican-American War. When we annexed the Southwest, they had no other, like they couldn't understand the language as well as they needed to. So they just picked Hispanic because it sounded like España. That's literally why the term Hispanic
Oh,
exists.
interesting.
Fun fact, yeah. It's by
That
the
is a
U.S.
fun fact.
Census Bureau.
I've
Yeah.
I've heard
And
that
I'll get to my second one, but go ahead.
I've heard that Nixon created that determination because there
No,
wasn't.
it goes back to the 1840s.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a U.S. Census Bureau term. Like basically, what the Census Bureau did was like they needed a term to refer to all these people that we had, annexed from Mexico. And the thing is, it didn't just apply to Mexican Americans that we had annexed. It also applied to those, like, remember, like especially back then in the Southwest, there were a massive number of Native American tribes that still lived out there, right? And the Census Bureau just applied the term Hispanic to all of them. Which, I mean, think about it. What
To
does the
Native
Navajo?
Americans?
Yes, even then.
Wow.
Like that's the thing. Yeah, so like I'm thinking about it, like that's another reason why I think you're like it's good that you brought up how like the term doesn't make any sense. It never really made sense because even back then, what does a Navajo voter have in common with, a Santa Fe Catholic friar? You know what I mean? So it was always ridiculous. So yeah, so that's the one thing I wanted to touch on. And the second thing I really wanted to touch on is so Charles, like I really was appreciative hearing what you said and like your idea of how this might be almost incited. Like what you're referring to is called stochastic terrorism. It's a real thing, right? Like essentially you use media these days, especially social media, to rile up people who are, pardon my language to any other fellow liberal in the space, crazy in the head, so to speak. You rile them up, you incite them to violence, and you basically unleash them on a target that you want. It's called stochastic
Yeah, I
terrorism.
think
It's
this.
a
I
real
think
thing.
I've heard this term before.
Sorry, can I just
Yeah,
finish?
go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah. So, okay. So, I want you. I'm going to preface this by saying I have only circumstantial evidence for the theory I'm about to spell out, but I think it's very strong circumstantial evidence. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this because one thing that I've kind of been noticing is like these massive, especially right-wing terror campaigns, and I use that term relatively broadly. I'm not talking about just terrorist groups like the Proud Boys or Earth Keepers. I also mean like the lone wolves, like we talked about, like you said, Richard, like Buffalo, El Paso back in 2019, this guy in Allen, etc. Right? So like this whole period of right-wing terror, it really took off after Sandy Hook. It began with Sandy Hook, right? And it was roughly 2012, I think, right? So a little over a decade now. One thing that I don't know, like I'm really interested in hearing your guys talk about is like the thing is we know that the Russians are using stochastic terrorism as a tool to destabilize the United States domestically, right? Like this is in the Mueller report. This is in the various intelligence reports. I know that everyone has their skepticism of the intelligence community, but they know what they're doing when it comes to Russia, right? And I think the Ukraine war proved that. So they and I don't want to just say the Russians because the Chinese have been shown to be doing this too. They're also inciting so again, this is circumstantial, but based on some like leaked reporting and leaked intelligence I've seen from my sources, it looks like the guy who shot up the Monterey Bay, the Asian American dance club out there, he was radicalized by the CCP. Like he was actually radicalized through social media by the CCP, and he went on that killing rampage in Monterey Park against fellow Asian Americans, of course. But put that aside for a second. But like the funny thing, and again, let me be clear, all I have is circumstantial evidence for this. I don't have concrete, in your face proof. I can't provide that, unfortunately. But so like I'm just wondering, like, what do you guys think about this idea that basically all of the US's adversaries since about 2010, give or take, have been on a sustained campaign to essentially internally destabilize the US so our hegemony globally collapses, and specifically our hegemony over Eastern Europe as well as the first island chain. That's my theory, and I've seen a lot of like basically what I've seen is like a lot of indications that specifically the Russians and the Chinese have been funding massive disinformation ops and to essentially rile up all these hard right terrorists to go on killing rampages through through stochastic terrorism. So that's I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. And one other thing I would say is like one thing I feel like we all should remember is like at the end of the day, like let's put aside the issue of how to solve the gun problem. But the thing is, like, if you look at the Taliban training book for attacks on the U.S., they literally had a page in there of how you, like, in order to do a terror attack, all you had to do was go to a gun store in the U.S., buy a gun, and start shooting something up. Right? Like, this is a well-known secret, and this is one of the U.S.'s biggest geostrategic weaknesses, the Second Amendment. And now I don't mean to say that we should get rid of it. I'm not going to go there right now. I don't want to touch that topic, but I'm just saying, like, it is, that's part of it. So yeah, I wanted to hear what you guys thought on that. I know I sound
No,
crazy,
you
so
don't sound
pardon my
crazy.
No, you
pardon
don't.
me.
And in
No,
fact,
you don't sound
yeah,
crazy.
and in fact, I actually think that the stochastic terrorism term actually doesn't go far enough. So I think that so one thing we've seen. So I noticed you didn't mention the Israelis, right? And I think the Likud Israelis are particularly
Right. I wanted to be careful there, but you're right. The Likud is heavily part of this too.
yes,
You are right.
and of course, what they do is, in fact, we know that they've done a lot of training of the Chinese and Russians when it comes to this sort of thing. So they use social media to identify people who are mentally disturbed, and they kind of egg them on. So if you think about somebody's genetic predisposition to susceptibility, right, you can basically encourage people to post crazy things, and then you can then process them, right, put them through a process by which they get more and more radicalized, where you encourage them to buy guns and the like. And I've heard this from a lot of my friends in the intelligence community, that in fact what they find a lot of the times when they finally break into people's Twitter accounts or Facebook accounts or what have you, is they find messages with alt accounts or anonymous people out there egging the people on to go and commit the terrorist acts. So
These are the troll farms, especially,
no,
right?
so the
Like,
troll
I mean, the
farm stuff is
famous.
overstated. They use the troll farms to amplify the violence after the fact, but they actually have these cells of people that go around identifying malcontents in a society and encouraging them to go do violent things. So you could think about like the people who are mentally unstable because they are, because they are schizophrenics, or because they are part of some fringe political group, or because they have some racial grievance, or so on and so on and so on. And so what they do is they then process them. Now, they sometimes identify people who are known autistics, or people who are on psychotropic drugs, and encourage them to get off of the drugs. That's something that we've seen in the past. I actually wrote a report about this for the FBI, and I know it went all the way to the to Avril Haines's desk about examples of this that I'd seen over the years, and it's very much a thing. You could I posted some of the things up in the jumbotron, but the main person to really study on this topic is a guy by the name of Wang Huning, who's now the third.
Yep, I'm reading his book right now,
Yes, yes.
Charles.
And so I highly recommend his book. Of course, it's translated by Peter Thiel. The paid translation was done by Peter Thiel, which is quite interesting. And you'll see there's a lot of these right wingers who do things like they justify malcontents, like like the Oklahoma City bombing. We've seen that over the years. We've also seen them justify people like Ted Kaczynski, the sort of crazed bomber, Unabomber type. And so, yes, a lot of this stuff, just for historical purpose, and then I'll hand it over to Richard. But if you study the Special Operations Executive, which was Churchill's effort to destabilize Nazi Germany and the Imperial Japan, he encouraged people to basically go and cause all of this chaotic disruption in countries through all this antisocial activity. And you can see kind of TikTok in the same way, all these challenges that end up trending on TikTok, deface bathrooms, do graffiti, right, as sort of like promoting an antisocial kind of aesthetic or approach. And there's a great book, Eric Frank Russell tried to write about his experiences belonging to the Special Operations Executive, and the British government stopped him. So he wrote a science fiction book, which is a great book called Wasp, which is about basically this guy who is dropped behind enemy lines, and he puts on purple face paint to look like the aliens, and he goes and he destabilizes the enemy battle lines, for an enemy that was far larger and far more powerful. So yes, this is very much a thing, and I don't want to freak
Okay,
people out and
Charles.
scare them, but it's real. Yeah.
Sorry, Richard, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but can I add one more thing that I'm keeping an eye out? And this is, again, part of my conspiracy brain. I appreciate you guys like saying that I'm not entirely crazy, because I've been kind of digging into this stuff on my free time for a little time, trying to connect the dots, and it's actually pretty freaky. But one thing I'm going to say is, like, since you guys are kind of like at least willing to entertain my thoughts here, keep an eye on what happens with the debt limit, because like especially on X Day. Because the thing is, like, from what I know, the Russians, and specifically the Catholic Church and the Chinese, but really the Russians and the Catholic Church, have been trying to destroy the dollar's supremacy for centuries. I mean centuries. Before the dollar, it was the British pound. And the thing is, like, they both want to go back to the gold standard. And the logic behind that is that Russia is the world's largest gold producer. I mean, they claim to be the world's third largest gold producer, but they fudge the numbers. And what they do is they engage all their commerce, especially nowadays, and post
Producer or holder?
producer. Like, they have
They
massive
have
gold
mining.
Yeah,
deposits
we don't
yes, yeah.
really know how much they actually produce because they lie about their
Yeah,
numbers,
Well,
and we see that on
right.
yeah,
the
so
satellite
I
stuff.
didn't know there was any kind of gold mining going on in Russia.
Oh no,
South Africa is famous
no,
for it.
Russia
I
is the
did know
world.
that I did know that Russia held or holds quite a bit of gold.
No. Russia is the world's largest gold producer. And the reason they have such
Oh, okay.
massive secret gold reserves is because they have the world's largest gold deposits all throughout Siberia and the taiga. So they produce a whole bunch of gold. And actually, right now, what they're doing to avoid sanctions is they're just flying a bunch of gold on planes everywhere to engage in trade to avoid using the dollar and the euro. And the thing is, the Catholic Church is another one that has been trying to overthrow the dollar hegemony, and before that, the British pound hegemony, for a really long time, because they have massive gold reserves. And the thing is, the debt limit right now, the entire global economy runs on the US dollar being a fiat currency, being guaranteed by Section 4 of the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, which says that the public debts of the United States shall not be questioned. And here's the thing. I have said, I believe for a long time that it is not a coincidence that in the far right of this country, that it has been for a really long time trying to destroy the US's debt credit rating, and to basically make our debt worthless by having us purposefully breach the debt ceiling, because we all know this is a manufactured crisis. So yeah, I'm gonna say keep an eye out to see what
Yeah,
happens the day we
I think
do
this is
breach the debt
I think
limit.
this is a bit simplistic. I mean, so one thing to know is like the Pope is much more aligned with dollar supremacy because the Pope is likely has a lot of connections with the CIA. So like if you
Charles, so here's the thing. This particular pope is, but keep in mind, like, ever since Francis took over, there's basically been an internal civil war in the Catholic Church between the Jesuit reformers and the conservative Benedictines, and they've basically been going at it for years since Francis took over, as he tried to push the Reformations. And this has been like the whole push, like the backlash against
well,
Vatican
certainly
II that we've
certainly
been
you see
seeing.
him shut down Opus Dei, right? Which Opus Dei is of course very
Well,
Israeli,
in
very
theory,
Russian. No,
in
in
theory.
practice we've seen him get rid of and exile a lot of the bishops who are engaged in that, right? So that's not nothing. But I do take your point. I mean, I think the general gist of what you're
I mean,
saying
the
is
thing
right.
is, they've set up their own. So from what I've seen, and again, this is partially based on circumstantial evidence that I've seen, a lot of those bishops he fired, remember, like, a whole bunch of them were, or he got rid of, I should say, a whole bunch of them were killed mysteriously, and then the rest of them, like, basically went underground. Do you remember that? A lot of them ended up showing up in, like, the Australian outback all of a sudden a few years ago. And they've basically been engaging in a, like, I don't want to say secret war because that sounds even too conspiratorial for
No, I
me.
think that's
But yeah,
correct.
it's
I
like
mean,
a
I will just tell you, like, I know that British intelligence is very, very
Sorry,
keen,
guys. Can I bring up
you know.
something more on topic before
But
we
yeah,
cut back?
let's let Viceroy bring up something more on topic because I think this is not wrong, Vic, but
It's
I think it's
it's a
kind of
it's a
overstated.
it's a different direction, but it's definitely related, especially to the topic. But I just think for me, the trends that you're seeing both rhetorically and in events like this recent one really brings into question what has been the use of mass red pilling over like the last 7 years. Um, because it seems to me again on like a mental level that people who are really professed, red pill takers and really have embraced the red pill, they seem to be reeling from the loss of the post enlightenment lie in their own psyche. And that's how you have for 7 years, you know, mostly young white males, but of course, as Richard said, not exclusively, people just hurtling into space and just having no orientation point, because even though they repudiate that post enlightenment sort of, perspective, that modernistic perspective, it did serve as a binding agent of sorts, and now they have nothing to serve that same function. So I kind of just wanted to see what you thought
Yeah,
about that.
this is a rather Spencerian perspective on matters. I have actually given speeches about this in 2015 about how, if we take that red pill metaphor seriously, what happens to Neo when he takes the red pill? Where, well, he ends up, starving in a steel submarine and unhappy and eating gruel and so on. There's this way in which everyone needs an illusion, and every society is based on fundamentally on lying, as Plato knew well. And if you just rip that away from people, they go into despair. And I think this is where it does connect with what Vic was saying about stochastic terrorism. Now, that term is getting used by a lot of, kind of egghead liberal types. And I think the way that they're using it is in a non-conspiratorial manner. They're using it in a kind of actuarial manner where it's like, so Marjorie Taylor Greene says we should have a grand divorce, and then 99.9% of her people will hear that and resonate with it and not do anything. But there's that 0.101% that will take that a little too seriously. So that when you put something out there, it might have an effect. Now, I don't fully dispute that, but I am fairly skeptical of that. But I think what's going on is something much kind of worse with stochastic terrorism. It's first off outright incitement, and secondly, it is in the sense of what Charles was talking about some of these shooters. We don't know all these things, but who was talking to them? There was this interesting case of a former FBI agent talking to the Buffalo guy who was in his chat and talking to him, even I think on even at the day of the event and things like that. So I think it's more kind of direct than we imagine. But the other thing is that way of like, what everything's based on a lie, but like when you're breaking down one religious viewpoint, which is the religious viewpoint that most people hold, is a kind of American liberalism and American exceptionalism and democracy and all that kind of stuff. When you break that down, what do you put in its place? So I wouldn't say it's breaking down Enlightenment thinking. I think it's breaking down a religious conception, a post-Christian secularization
Sure.
of
Richard, I think it's
America.
specifically
Well,
Well,
sorry.
hold on. Let
Sorry,
me finish, and I'll pass the baton to Vic. What do you put in its place? And I do think that what are you incepting in these people? And I think that Christopher Nolan film, excellent metaphor. I think he was actually talking about matters like this in that film. But what are you putting in its place? What kind of new ideas are you going to place in their brain, and that they are going to think they came up with themselves? And I think that's the kind of danger of a lot of the red pill ideology in the right, is that it doesn't really lead anywhere but this. This is a great thing that Charles has emphasized, of the Flight 93 election as a kind of metaphor. Like, let's storm the cockpit. Can we fly the plane? Oh, hell no. Are we going to probably crash anyway? Yeah. But let's just do it. That incepted the idea of January 6th in the minds of millions of boomers. That article, which was passed around like gangbusters, a month before the election, that incepted that idea that we have to do something. You have to take action, even if that action is stupid and pointless and damaging.
Sure. Can I add something? Because
sure,
I read, and it's so strange now, but it has to be said that I'm 29 years old. I was actually around for 2016. Of course, you were too, Richard. And I do think that, and I'm not completely unsympathetic. I understand why this happened, but I think we went into the deep end and we didn't really think about what that actually meant, or what would be the consequences of that. And we actually looked at any sort of idea of looking at consequences as an equivocation itself. And that was very, very, very foolish. And I can say that now because, I'm 6 years older, and but it's just, and a lot of these people are younger, and that they haven't made that learning curve, and it's yeah, they listen. Only a small cadre of people through history have been allowed to handle the truth, because only a small cadre of people can handle the truth. And this has been something that's been known throughout history. And we've kind of, like, ironically, on the right, even though they're so anti-egalitarian, they still have this, red pilling the masses sort of ideology. And but it's just
Yeah,
it's very
think
it's
it's
very
I think
frustrating.
it's far more interesting to think about the fact that the Matrix film was, of course, came out when Warner Brothers was very much under control of a kind of like weird Chinese cash infusion, which I think is not to be ignored here, right? Like films have long been used as psychological operations. Came out in 1999. It was roughly coincident with the Columbia or Columbine shooting. If you recall this, there was sort of like parallels between the two of them. And I think that there's very much been an effort to encourage a kind of mass violence on the part of the Chinese, the Likud Israelis, and the Russians, and to encourage a kind of antisocial, anti-joining, effort. And I think this started, first with the Gen Xers, which I think was a big part of the drug culture. I think it bled into the millennials. It didn't. I don't think it quite took as easily with the millennials. But I think it's very much a thing that we see with the Gen Zers and all the sort of crazy antisocial behavior they're encouraged to do with TikTok. And I should just say, like, I think we oftentimes overlook like the ideology stuff. I think is often this idea that like you download an ideology and then you act on that ideology. I don't think that's actually true. I think that there are these larger macroeconomic things going on, and then we look for post event rationalizations, right? So like it doesn't really matter what the Branch Dravidians actually believed theologically, right? What matters is that they were running around like selling guns, right, in Waco, right? That's what actually matters. And so I think a lot of the times we tend to like, first of all, not understand what's appealing about cults, right? The sense of belonging, the sense of like being a part of something epic. You can kind of see this with the Elon fanboys now, right? Like, we're going to Mars, it's the future, it's all this sort of stuff.
Right.
The same thing is kind of true, that basically we have a proliferation of these kind of cults around us right now because of the intimate relationships we can build because of the iPhone. And so when you look at the material change in circumstance, right? Like, we all have iPhones. We all tell our iPhones our most intimate aspects of ourselves. Our iPhones can be hacked by governments, by malefactors, and so forth. And when we really kind of sit back and think about that, there's all sorts of interesting ramifications of that. So whereas Peter Thiel famously said that we don't live in an age of cults, I think au contraire, like we have cults all around us. The QAnon cult, the New Age cult. I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow's cult. I mean, so on and so forth. And the question is, like, some of these can be quite helpful in different ways, right? But many of them are quite dead end, quite literally. And in fact, they want their members to actually have a dead end, right? Like, right wing death squads suggest that there is a death that's possible here, right? So if you're trying to kill somebody,
Yes.
they are of course going to try to kill you. And so I think that's sort of something we see often here as well.
I think it's just, sorry if I can say, I just think it's a miracle that we haven't had more people go crazy, because, you know, I understand what you're saying, that there is not a direct connection between people believing ideology and then acting on something. But I think you also have to factor in that the frog has been boiling for an awful long time. And, and our, our increasing sort of exposure because of technology is a part of that. But this has been for 7 years. This is, you know what I mean? So I think it's actually amazing that we haven't had more, sort of like schizophrenic explosions, or violent
Well,
explosions.
there's certainly people that want to increase those numbers, right? So yeah, I think you're quite right on that point.
Yes, yeah, yeah, and there's and if we're talking about hostile actors, or bad faith actors, there's more than a fertile ground, is my current thinking, and that's what's really that can be utilized or manipulated, however you want to put it, and that's what's kind of disturbing.
Definitely. Vic, do you want to jump in there? And then I'm actually going to send you guys off the platform for a little bit before I let some more new people in. But go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, actually, I have to head out soon in a minute, but so can you DM me though, Richard? Because I'd love to talk to you more about like this, because I want to run a few theories by you, since you know far more about the right wing than I do, and maybe we can
Mm-hmm.
compare notes and see. So I think if you could, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, I
I wanted to.
just followed you, so I will do that.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Richard. So just so you know, I am a liberal, a devout liberal, and proud of it. So you're going to see a lot of liberal shit on my end, and I definitely do take advantage of social media being crazy. So there's that. But
Yes.
that aside,
Hail Brandon, hail centrism, hail victory.
yeah, right. So I wanted to touch upon like so you were talking about like how like what this is all pushing against. So my theory is essentially like the whole idea is of these movements is to push against both the sexual revolution, and by that I mean everything from just like the opening up of contraception and sex before marriage, as well as the LGBTQ movement. So pushing back and reversing all of that, as well as reversing the New Deal. And by that, I mean like getting rid of the entire federal government as we currently know it. And
Yeah.
yeah, okay, so bear with
They
me
are
as I go a little.
currently, just to
Sorry?
jump in here, there is a move currently that is very real. Now, is it going to win or not? I don't know. It's very real to convene a new constitutional convention in which they would create this hyper libertarian new
And that
constitution that would basically make the administrative state impossible effectively.
Right. And also there's several Supreme Court cases in front of them right now that they're trying to do that, without the constitutional amendment as well. But specifically, like, so my whole idea is basically like this goes back to the business coup of the 1930s. I don't know if any of you guys know that or know of that or have read about it, but it was basically as FDR, he came into office in 33, and the Democrats in Congress, they passed the first New Deal. They started passing the first New Deal, and also like there was that famous FDR confiscated all the privately held gold in the country to fund the New Deal, and he cut off the direct conversion from the dollar to the to the gold. He signed an EO to confiscate all the privately held gold, excuse me, in the country to fund the New Deal, and he also ended the convertibility from the dollar to the gold and vice versa in order to keep
Right.
the, yeah, all that. So and basically like all the business henchmen and leaders of the country got together, and they essentially turned one of the generals, I forget his name, and basically told him like, we will give you an army of 500,000 angry veterans if you promise to charge the White House and Congress and overthrow FDR and the Democratic Congress. And the only reason it failed is because the general turned and like put it all before Congress, and Congress did the investigation. So like this has more or less been covered
Smedley
up in.
Butler, Smedley Butler is who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
so you
Yeah,
guys know exactly what I'm talking about then.
yeah,
So yeah, like
yeah. In fact, my family was heavily engaged with FDR back in the day,
okay,
and there's a lot of the history that the liberals have written about this period that's overstated. So, for instance, FDR was using a lot of the attacks on the gold standard or the gold stuff as a way of attacking the mob interests that were heavily involved with resource extraction within the country. So there's some debate by historians on this topic, but yes, the one thing to understand too about this period is that there was a sort of foundationization of a lot of great fortunes at the time that kind of
right.
cropped up in the 1920s. So the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and so forth
All of
all
that was
got
also set
taken
up
over.
like in conjunction with the American Liberty Institute in order to oppose the New Deal and get it repealed, right? And yeah, like, and the
Yeah,
thing
and so
is,
Matt
like,
Matt Stoller's stuff is very good on this, but I think he doesn't understand the organized
oh,
crime
I don't
stuff.
trust Matt Stoller. He's, as far as I'm concerned, he's a Russian plant. I know he's not actually, but he functions, as far as I'm concerned, as like a pseudo FSB mouthpiece. I don't really trust 90% of the stuff that comes out of his mouth. I'll be
Well, I
honest.
mean, his whole concern, his whole idea is that basically there's too much monopoly power within the United States,
And that
and
much
I
is
think
true. Yeah,
and I think that
yeah,
much that's functionally true. I don't know. Wouldn't necessarily subscribe to everything he says, but like
right.
but on his history in the Goliath book, which is very good for those who are curious, like 700 pages about
I
ancient
read it.
trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. I recommend it to people who are in this chat. But basically, look, the truth of
Sorry,
the matter.
Charles. Can I just finish
Yeah.
briefly?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, the thing, like, and this, to connect it all to what I said earlier, like, this is all like the way I've kind of come to the conclusion, and my conspiracy theory is that this is all a method by our foreign adversaries taking advantage of our internal divisions, our internal, crazy people, our internal, whatever, what have you, in order to take the U.S. out as well, out of the world, as well as to overthrow our own government here and turn the U.S. into total chaos, right? Because the only way the Russians can advance through Eastern Europe and seek dominion over Eastern Europe is if the U.S. pulls out of Eastern Europe as well as Central and Western Europe, but like pulls out of Europe. And the only way the Chinese can can take Taiwan, can advance into Korea, can advance into the Philippines and Vietnam, and also India and all the rest, is if the U.S. leaves the first island chain in the Asian Rim, the Pacific Rim, right? So yeah, like, and the way I like my whole theory is essentially that, like, like our adversaries are using our domestic problems and divisions and domestic terrorist groups and inciting stochastic terrorism in order to effectuate the goals of essentially the business coup of the 1930s. Sorry, that's what I wanted to get at.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the liberal view, and I think that overstates it. I mean, I think they actually have terrorist cells that they use to identify and process our people. I personally encountered them, and the left wing view is basically these right wingers say all this crazy shit, and some portion of the population converts and does mass attacks. And I think that's maybe true, but I think more likely there's actually groups actively out there looking for malcontents and crazy people. And that's sort of the evidence that I've
Well,
seen. But
all I'll say is this: one of
yeah,
the federal judges appointed by Trump is a known CCP agent, and he specifically overruled the FBI's background check.
yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, look,
Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I mean, there's many such cases. Like the Federalist Society itself could be argued as a Chinese operation.
Well, the Federal Society is mostly run by the Russians, from what I know, right? Like
No,
Maria
because
Butina
the
famously
Russian
swept
Jew,
away.
no, the Russian Jew who is the money behind it is a guy named Barry Side, and Barry Side produces most of the surge protectors in the United States. The whole company Triplite, and he's very pro.
Which is
I've actually
funded by the CCP.
Yes, I visited him actually in his office in Chicago, and he has a giant picture of himself with Netanyahu in that office. So, and of course, he was the one who gave the 1.6 billion dollars to Leonard Leo, which the whole company, and Leonard Leo is the one who picked all the judges for the Federalist Society. But remember, the all of these countries want to basically install a kind of leadership class over us through the Federalist Society and through like Teneo
To
and through a number
eliminate
of these
our
organizations,
democracy, yes.
not just to eliminate our democracy, but also to eliminate those of us who are Americans who've been here for 400 plus years. And in fact, if you get to the part in the Wang Huning book, he talks about how you want to replace the leadership of a country, that's a very key thing to do. And
See,
I think,
so Charles, where I disagree is like my conclusion is more that they just want us to be focused on attacking and killing and hating each other, so that they can advance outside the
no,
U.S.
my dear friend, they want to steal all the resources out of Alaska and out of
How the hell
Australia
would they
and
get
Canada.
here?
No, what they'll do is they'll install kind of like dictatorship-like things. Like that's what Elon Musk's grandfather was a part of the technocracy, right? And so China has this problem, which is it requires resources to survive, and we can be much more autarkic because of Canada and Alaska and so forth. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to get all the resources out of Australia, all the mining, all the raw materials, because they need that to continue their growth. They've so polluted their own countries, and they've so harmed their own countries. And so that's really what the Chinese kind of like national interest is. And so what they do is they're very interested in propping up people that are mining magnates. They're very interested in sort of propping up dictatorships that will let them get the resources on the cheap. That's something we've seen all throughout the world. And it's why Biden signed the executive order on organized crime, because what he says when he signed the executive order was that many criminal organizations, many organized crime entities, cartels and the like, are actually backed by foreign adversaries of the United States. They sort of work hand in glove to reduce the sense-making apparatus.
Well, I mean, the cartels get all their money, not all their money, but a whole lot of their money from Russia, right? I mean, it's
No,
FSB
no, no,
funnels
no.
a lot of it.
No.
Okay,
The Chinese get most of their. The
forcefully.
Chinese are all behind the fentanyl in the United States. It's
Okay,
not a Russian thing. But yeah, go ahead.
okay. I'm going to forcefully put a bookmark in this. I just don't want the whole space to be about this kind of stuff. I mean, it is interesting,
Yeah, right.
but it is my
Go
space.
ahead, Richard. Moderate as you see fit.
So
Yeah, thanks for having me, Richard. I really appreciate the chance we're getting to talk to you. And I'll DM you. I gotta go anyway. So thank you guys for engaging with me. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.
Talk to you soon. All right, let me talk a little bit. Actually, let me let up some new people here. Leanne, I was going to talk a little bit about the Proud Boys. I said a lot of this on my Substack, where I do a irregular kind of video essay or audio essay, I should say, kind of roving podcast. I'll talk a little bit about the Proud Boys, and I'll reiterate some of the things I said there and how it relates to this. I am rather taken with the notion that all three of these events, the Proud Boys being convicted and these mass terror from Hispanic right-wing death squads, are happening together. So, but first off, Leanne, thank you for being on here. Pro-life Christian MAGA and grandmother, welcome. Leanne, you have to unmute yourself. Going once, going twice. There you are. Okay. Yes, Leanne. Okay. Leanne, you got to get prepared before you join the space, all right? You've been removed from being a speaker, but you can still listen, of course. Let me talk a little bit about the Proud Boys. So I think the first I heard of the Proud Boys was when Gavin McInnes sent me an email about them. And this was before the election of Trump. It was well into the alt-right era, and it was well into alt-right hysteria at that point. And Gavin sent an email to Peter Bremelo, Jared Taylor, and myself. And it was a very brief one. I actually read it in my audio essay thing, my audio journal. And it basically said, oh, hey guys, I just want to let you know that I'm starting this group called the Proud Boys. And you guys are welcome to kind of participate to some degree. I think he invited us to his Facebook group, which, I would rather go to the dentist, I think. But nevertheless, he almost wanted to kind of run it. I mean, he run it by us or kind of get the goodwill of, the top white nationalist ideologues of the alt-right era. And he said, oh, we're multiracial group, but, we think the West is best, and the West was created by white men. So, basically we're a white nationalist group, although we're going to allow in all these other people. That's the way that he pitched it. He certainly didn't pitch it as an army or as violent. Now, Gavin McInnes on his program, the Gavin McInnes show and any various programs, and I, full disclosure, I went on his Gavin McInnes show a few times, probably 3 or 4, maybe more times. And I did not witness this myself, but I've seen clips. You cannot deny this. The guy is frankly calling for violence. There is no other way to interpret what he is saying. He basically says, if you see someone who looks like Antifa, go punch him in the face. We need to strike first. You don't need to defend yourself. Many of us are going to go to jail. Many of us are going to die. That's all right. You've just got to go do it. It was that Flight 93 stuff, on steroids, basically. So the notion that Gavin keeps telling everyone that he created this little drinking club and it got out of hand and so on is complete nonsense. I mean, if anything, Gavin was far more violent than the people who were joining his group, at least at the beginning. That's what I imagine. Again, I've never attended a Proud Boy gathering. I've never,
I went to only one, and it was extremely not lady friendly, as you might imagine. And,
well, yeah,
and I
and
think he
he's
joked
going
about it
for
being a gay club, And I don't think you're totally wrong about that.
Right. Well, I'm sure there were gays in there. I remember seeing these things of like the Proud Boy blog where they were like promoting trannies, or I should say, sorry, I should say transsexual Americans. I really don't want to get banned. Don't want to use casual language like that. They were promoting transsexuals who were like saying, oh, I'm right wing, I love Trump, and I'm a woman, and blah blah blah. And so it was very open. Now, they also allowed in any religion except Islam, at least at the beginning. So they had kind of a residue of that 2000s era anti-Islamic stuff going on. But it seemingly you could be atheist, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, whatever, and you could join. And I think that was very true. But again, Gavin was calling for violence quite directly. He was opening things up, and there was a real proletarian quality to it. I'm sure there were gays involved, but my reading of the vibes was that it was very working class, and it was a lot like TRS or the Right Stuff, kind of this bombastic, reactionary, overweight crank. Were really attracted to the Proud Boys. There's probably a huge amount of crossover. I actually heard this. There was a huge amount of crossover between TRS and the Proud Boys. And so you already see here, they're kind of opening up to the Hispanic right-wing death squad. Like they would be totally cool with that. Oh, you're Catholic and you hate black crime and you hate the Democrats and blah, blah, blah. So fast forward a little bit, there was some street scuffles or fistfights that went on, and they got pretty violent, and Gavin decided to back away. Now, he said that his reasoning was that he didn't want there to be an actual leader of the group so that it couldn't be called a gang. So I think this was all just bullshit, effectively. I mean, a gang, I don't know. In a way, gangs don't have leaders. They might have an alpha somewhere, but they're real, it's real consensual. An organization, of course, has a hierarchy and a leader and an owner and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what the hell Gavin was talking about. He was in a way inspiring it to be more of a gang, and he installed a leader right after him. So basically what he said was nonsensical. And he inspired Enrico Tarrio, who was mentioned earlier. I didn't know anything about Enrico Tarrio's background. I learned later that he was federal informant of some kind. He's now going to
Enrique Tarrio. Yes, he was involved in some. He was involved in some drug sales back in the day, as he explained it to me. He was stealing or pilfering some kind of drugs that he was also selling on the street, and that's when he went to federal prison. And he was a federal informant involved in basically catching other people who were involved in the drug gang.
Right. Yes, a wonderful gentleman. In other words. And
I will say he is quite charming in person as far as these things go, but yes, go ahead.
Well, I've never met him, and I'm glad that I've never met him.
No, and I could see, let me put it this way, I could see how he could persuade a bunch of men who are kind of natural betas to do stupid, crazy things. I mean, he is quite charming and able, he is the center of every room he walks into. He's like one of those charming Hispanic types.
Interesting. He was an Antonio Banderas of the
yes. I mean, he is the
Death Squad class. Yeah.
Yes, he is the type that would inspire you to follow him. And I myself don't really go for that. And I was like, holy shit, this guy's very persuasive when I last spoke to him, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this guy's clearly like up to no good, and I need to stay away from him.
Yeah. Interesting. So anyway, he gets installed, and so you already have a Hispanic face to a white nationalist organization. So all of this talk about, Hispanics can't be involved in this kind of stuff is bollocks at this point. I mean, it's already happened. In fact, Hispanics are, in this case, quite literally taking the lead of violent right-wing organizations.
They're doing the job that white Americans won't do, right?
Yeah, exactly, as they are wont to do. And it's interesting also with Gavin's stuff. So Gavin, he's made all these curious statements that looked at retrospectively might be revealing. So when he was working for Rebel Media, he went to Israel, and he and Faith Goldie were doing this kind of like, jerk off session for Zionism, basically, just how great it is and wonderful. It's so right wing, and everyone here loves Trump. And it was very much of the kind of Rebel Media 2016 vibe. And at one point, Gavin McInnes said, I can't believe that they hate us MAGA people because, I'm a Nazi for Israel. And it's a curious turn of phrase. Now, Gavin obviously is a pretty outrageous guy, and I can see him saying some silly thing like that, where he's both kind of being politically incorrect while being outrageous all at the same time. But I wonder, how literal that statement was, in fact, him being a Nazi for Israel, as it were. And we should probably think about that and take his words seriously. But there is no doubt. I mean, I have gotten to the point where I would poo-poo all of this kind of liberal hysteria about, say, Russian interference or, these alt-right groups being terrorist organizations. I would probably poo-poo those, 5 years ago, and just basically like, no, these are organizations, these are Americans working for a political goal. You can't just shut us up by using the T word, that is terrorist. At this point, I mean, I have a very different perspective on this. I mean, what exactly is the point of the Proud Boys outside of violence? I mean, I guess it is a drinking club, and I'm sure they all meet together, but you can do that anyway. And I actually spoke to a young woman who actually lives in Portland, and she was just telling me all of these, squalid and hilarious stories about the Proud Boys' battles with Antifa in Portland. It's just this, it resembles, and it's exactly like gang warfare. And there's also just no doubt that the Proud Boys, along with the Oath Keepers, were a kind of army that was used in order to attack the Capitol and attempt to overthrow the government. I mean, I don't know how we can describe it as anything other than that. And the notion that right-wingers just will endlessly apologize for this stuff and just endlessly avoid talking about the reality of a situation just never ceases to amaze me. That is what it is. I'm sure ISIS is a drinking club as well. I bet ISIS started out with a guy saying, I just want to start a fun event. We can get together and talk about Islam and read the Quran together or whatever. And, but no one would deny that the, most pressing function of ISIS is as a terror organization. So I don't know what we're going to find out with regard to the Allen, Texas shooter, but, is he a member of the Proud Boys? Is he part of these online chat groups? Is he kind of like a wannabe Proud Boy in a way? Again, we don't know, but all of these things sound extremely plausible in my mind.
I agree, and I think we should say too that many of these protests and fights all occur in areas that are opportunity zones, right? So we saw with the riots in 2020 the connections of various sort of black street gangs that were moving drugs, and they were of course rioting in Minneapolis, where lots of basically known drug routes were. And if you burn down an area and they're all in an opportunity zone, well, you can buy that property quite cheaply now, can't you? Right? So there's a certain sense in which the gangs are kind of used, the kind of fake battles are used to destroy the property values of the surrounding area so that other, gentrification and other efforts can take place.
Right. They didn't quite use the alt-right for all of these things. I mean, I think the alt-right in many ways was just subsumed into the broader American right. I do think that happened. Whether that was an objective or not, I don't know.
Well, yeah,
but,
I mean,
QAnon.
JD Vance sounds awfully like, things that you or I used to say like 5 years ago about Israel and its
Oh
birth rates
yeah.
and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. He
So in many
sounds like
respects, these
Kevin
arguments
Deanna,
won.
basically.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
arguments won, basically. They took over the Republican Party in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, I
Right.
should say.
Yeah, I think unfortunately as well. And QAnon is, 100 or 1,000 times larger than the alt right ever was. And I think the alt right, to the degree that it was still relevant in 2020, it was because it was Q adjacent, so to speak. It was basically using those talking points while doing something else.
Yeah, and we should
Anyway,
also we should
yeah,
remember
go
that the
ahead.
beer hall putsch took place, right? The Nazis were themselves a drinking club, which
Sure,
I think is something that's often overlooked as well. You know.
sure.
I want to ask you guys one quick thing. Thank you for the speaker. Both, I think you, Richard, and Charles may have interesting insights. So I'm concerned about this kind of violence, as I think both of you are, this extreme right, far right violence. But I think the one problem we have is not just the ideologies and memes on the far right, but the de-radicalization industry has just been so ineffective, and it seems much more interested in maintaining like a socially acceptable liberal discourse and actually like turning people off from these ideas. Like, I mean, I just can't imagine the ADL saying hate stops here is actually deprogramming anybody, or the SPLC. So I'm
Oh,
wondering.
you're quite right, and in fact, I think many times the anti-cult activists are themselves processing these people and using them and saving them up for later. So I think you're onto something. But you could see like the proliferation of the BetterHelp database, right, where everyone's encouraged to get therapy, get therapy, get therapy, and you could think about if you were in control of such a database and you were a foreign actor, or you had your assets within it, how useful that could be. So I think you're
Yeah,
well onto something. Yeah.
I guess just my question, though, just to finish, and then I'd be interested in hearing from both of you, is if you having encountered people who at least are on this wavelength, the Marjorie Taylor Greens or the Proud Boys or so on, how would you go about deprogramming them, or do you have a method?
Um, my view is basically to lead by example. But I do believe that there will be lots of these people that suffer, and there's really no. Look, I think America is always in something of a state of civil war. The question is how hot it is. And this has basically been the case, maybe since even the English Civil War. So I think there's just something to this, and what I think is helpful is to break people out of the patterns of thinking that they have. So it's partly why I do the writing and talking that I do. I think also we can change the material condition. So if we're giving people good jobs in factories, rather than having them like take fentanyl and die, right? I think that can have a huge impact as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, look, I favor a lot of regulations of these various tech companies. I favor breaking them up, reducing their market power in different ways. But I think if we're not talking about the technical means by which people are radicalized, then we're not really having the conversation. So I think we need to destroy Fox News. We need to destroy TikTok. We need to basically take these things out of commission. And that we can use our legal system. We can use, shareholder activism. We can use nonviolent means of achieving that objective. But I think it's a real concern. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I second all of this. I agree that the touchy feely hand holding, hugging de radicalization efforts are really not going to work. And in many ways, people are getting radicalized understandably or due to real events. And you're not just going to bring them into liberal discourse. I mean, liberal discourse sucks. So, yeah, lead by example, offer a different path than this, be highly critical of the American right. I mean, those are the things that I would do. But yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that you can go hold their hand or hug them all you want, but there are major forces that benefit from them being crazy, and so it's like Russia benefits from them being crazy. That Russia is, falling over themselves to in outreach to the American right. That is very clear. A lot of the propaganda is not even for domestic consumption. It's actually for American consumption. Um, so there's that. They've taken over a bit of the left, the tanky left. They've taken over much of the right. or influenced it, if not taken it over. There's forces within Israel that can benefit from this and mobilize these forces, as Charles has gone into. So I think the whole de-radicalization effort is kind of for the birds.
So these people are just fools, and they are objects of historical forces, and they're going to be cannon fodder in some sense. There's just these
Correct.
far right terrorists. That's your view,
Yes.
okay?
Yes. And maybe, have you ever seen that movie, the Kingsman?
I
It's kind
actually
of a
haven't. It's
James
definitely on my
Bond
list
spoof.
of films to see. But yeah,
It's
go ahead
pretty
and.
fun. It's not a great film, but there was that point where this tech executive, I think he was using radio waves, and he was able to inspire like what was Westboro Baptist Church to like just totally go crazy and kill each other. And he actually, even one of the Kingsmen was kind of part of the victim of all this. I mean, I think it's an interesting metaphor for what is going on. Um, I would also say, isn't it maybe a bit eugenic for that kind of thing to happen? To be honest, like, are we really losing, our
I mean,
best people?
there was that historical thing, where they used wars to get rid of overpopulation.
Yeah.
So, I
Oh,
think that's a crass way of looking at it, but I do take your point.
that's
Yeah.
a harsh view. I'll give one counter example to this. Very kind of maybe rather colorful one. Do you guys remember years ago on YouTube there was this kid who was like, I don't know, this teenage girl who was like a neo-Nazi Evalian. Do you remember this individual or no?
Yes, I do. She
Okay.
was like 15 or maybe even
Yeah,
younger.
yeah. Okay, now she's apparently 25 now, and uh,
Wow.
yeah, she reads my content. So a lot of my content is debunking Holocaust denial, and she reads my content, and she's like undergone this slow de-radicalization, and just learning that a lot of this red pill narrative is actually just as stupid as the mainstream narrative that people are latching out against was kind of the final step in her de-radicalization. So I understand what you're saying, and I think we do, liberals like myself, tend to overrate how much reason can cash out individual reason in terms of like these social forces and wanting to change people from falling into them. But I also think there's more hope. You guys will yield, and I certainly don't want to. I mean, look,
Yeah,
if we write out these people as
yeah,
I'll just finish in 10 seconds, and
yeah.
I'll
Go ahead.
love to hear you guys. Thanks so much. I just don't want to think of. I mean, I know this is it sounds kind of wimpy or whatever, but I don't want to think of fellow citizens, whether it's this far right crazy terrorist, Mexican neo-Nazi, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, even someone who just believes in bad ideas, are just totally hopeless. But yeah, I understand your argument, but yeah.
No, I must tell you that I've met Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't think it's just a belief thing. I think she's genuine about this stuff, and I don't think you're going to shake her off of it. Um,
She's just
so
a bad person, like
yeah.
fundamentally. I mean, it's like she's a rotten human being. I mean, why bother?
If you had a database of all the mentally ill or social malcontents in a population, imagine how useful that would be if you could just push a button and send them places like the Capitol or to various other mass events. And I think that's the world we're living in now,
Yeah.
which is extremely disturbing, to put it mildly. you know? And by the way, I think, though, that we are pushing some of this back. I mean, Tucker Carlson losing his show. Um, there are aspects of this that I think are net beneficial. Like, I do think we got rid of BuzzFeed News. We've gotten rid of a lot of these very compromised publications. And we seem to be in a battle for the soul of the Supreme Court right now. God knows how that will end. But, like, let's not say the stakes aren't severe,
Yeah. All right. Punish, you would like to speak, and then I'll go to Greg and Raph.
Hey man, how's it going, Richard? How's it going, Chuck? Major respect for throwing the
Going
space
well.
up. But what was it? Yo, I really think Chuck is onto something where the shooter seems to have like ties with foreign entities that radicalize you, similar to like how a San Bernardino was happening. Because like people are just looking at the shooter Mauricio Garcia's tattoos, and then they see that the tattoos align with Puro Tango Blast, which is tier 1 by the Texas DPS in terms of gang threats. And like if anyone knows anything about gang politics in Texas, it's that Puro Tango Blast is allied with the Los Zetas. Their ops, the Paisas, are allied with the Gulf Cartel, and also Tango Blast other ops, Barrio Aztecas, aligned with the Juarez Cartel. As you know, anything on the Atlantic coast, all these sides are beefing because it's over who has control of moving fentanyl into America from there. And even with Los Zetas, if you look at it, how did they start off? They started off as a protection force for the Gulf Cartel. Why? Because they were former Mexican special operations who were trained by literal Israeli special operations. And their leader, who is it? I think it's Devino Morales, Z40. That's what they know him on the streets as. He was literally
Yep.
trained by Israeli special forces. And so then this reeks of something that, like, again, another case of where you have these instances of Israel and China, like as Chuck put it, he coined the term Chisraeli, like this type of influence breeding stochastic violence on America. Because as we see, like some records show, like this guy Mauricio Garcia, he's like an outcast in society. It's not like some reports were saying he was living with his family. Other things were saying that he was crashing in and out of motels. So, like, yeah, these are the people that are the most easily to be psyoped and to be brainwashed into doing this.
And we should also submit the possibility that he was encouraged by his gang to do this as a kind of sacrifice of sorts. So this is something that that happens quite often in Latin America, where somebody gets in debt or they get in some sort of serious financial distress, and what the gangs do is they offer to take care of the person's family if they'll go do an assassination or they'll go and do a mass shooting of something or something to that effect. So we have to consider the possibility that some of these people who are acting in this way are willing, sort of, soldiers of a sort, and that they are being protected by a larger network.
Yeah, big facts. Because it's like you see how intricate this network is. Because especially once you see the Los Zetas connection or whatnot, like of just because I know when the Los Zang drug trafficking organization was nabbed by the U.S., I think it was Justice Department. It was shown that like how do they push in these fentanyl analogs or whatnot? Well, they start in the Guatemala Frontera Corozal border. They go into Chiapas, then they go to Tapachula, which then is literally itself is a sizable ethnic Chinese community. And then literally all they got to do is go up that Atlantic coast in territory totally controlled by the Zetas. So it's just, you see like how.
And of course, there's not a very prominent rocket company that happens to be right in a known trafficking route in Brownsville, Texas, that we might talk about. If we want to keep our Twitter accounts, we will not talk about this. But if there were a rocket company and it were in a known cartel corridor, that would be a very interesting thing to think about.
Hey, I'm so sorry for interrupting, guys. Rabbi Shmuel wants to speaker. I can recommend him as a good speaker. That's all I gotta say. He's the guy in the swimming pool. But sorry about the interruption.
And
Okay.
yeah,
Who is that?
Rabbi Shmuel. He actually is Jewish, by the way. It sounds like an alt-right name, but it's Rabbi Shmuel Nosen Schenker.
Okay. I don't see him. He hasn't requested, but
Okay.
okay.
and what
But I think you're quite onto something though, Punished, on this point of like the relationship of organized crime. We've seen the Israeli technology be used. Pegasus has been used against DEA agents, DHS agents, to neutralize them in Mexico, and that's sort of something we need to sort of consider here as well. And even Haaretz has written about a number of these types. Like I think the former dictator of Honduras was protected during the Trump presidency. And of course, we know that there's lots of connections that Bill Barr has with a lot of these networks as well, where he's not prosecuting some of the networks and he is prosecuting others of them. So very, very interesting kind of history here.
yeah, big facts. Only last thing I just want to say of Richard, the part that you're definitely right on is that how all these parts of like whether there's alt-right or alt-zog, whatever you want to call them, these groups that ape your stuff, they really do start off as these social clubs. And because you really see it, like, especially with the Latin America connection, because you really see it with whether it's Castanella, Mary, Bronze Age pervert, and his Claremont buddies. Look at who they make an iconoclast. They put people like Pinochet, Dubuisson from El Salvador, or like Bolsonaro and his ties to the Brazilian junta. Even like you saw when Tucker got axed, you had people like who have legit Claremont positions talking about how Tucker's based because he's helping right-wing death squads. So it's this ideation of like, yeah, really pushing this thing of like, yeah, you're just going to go to Latin America and just kill a bunch of people, or are you going to do that type of work because they're dirty communists, or I don't know
Let's
what it
not,
is.
let's not forget that Tucker himself was involved in some of these operations, back in the day with the Sandinistas, or the Contras rather, against the Sandinistas. So yeah, there's a long history here of kind of like right wing, Jewish connections in different ways. So it is something to take seriously. Obviously, Israel is a very split place, and there's lots of people there that don't support this. I think we're in the 18th week of protests against the Netanyahu government. But it is true. I mean, the connections of the drug cartels with the elements of the Israeli state are very real, as are the compromising of our DEA, FBI, and DHS. I mean, how funny is it that the Fedsurrection, which was the whole thing that Aaron Beatty was bleating about, that in fact that the FBI agent who was there was somebody who later went to go work for James O'Keefe and was involved in the Middle East desk, for the FBI, dealing with counterterrorism, right? So quite interesting as well.
Yeah, what was it like when you bring that up, Chuck? Especially because even today you saw these Claremont people like really cheering on what Chile's Republican Party as like the proof that Bukeleism is now sweeping over Latin America. And you just look at it of how it was positioned, of how he positioned himself. Well, he positions himself that, hey, my grandfather was in Germany during World War II, but he was able to swing all of Chile's Jewish voters to voting for him because they pointed out that, oh, the left-wing candidate supports Palestine. So you really see like of how you have these things like the Madrid compact, or I think the Madrid agreement that they make, where they sign these agreements with people like Bolsonaro and the Vox party in Spain. And it really has a big right-wing Zionist aspect. And like we know already of when Israel interference in Chile and how it helped export drugs in the first ever cocaine labs coming out of Chile, and how Pinochet helped them grow.
All right. Let's go to Greg.
Yo, what's up, Richard? How you doing?
Hey, how are you doing, Greg? Nice profile picture. I appreciate the Bond reference.
Yeah, thanks, dude. I'm a fellow Bond enjoyer as well. I just got a question about the NBA playoffs. Who you got winning? Who you got winning? I just want to know.
I have no idea who is
World
in
Series?
it.
What are you a fan of? What sports team? Sports
in general, or the NBA? I mean, I was kind of got a little bit interested.
I got rid of him. I got rid of him. He's kind of one of these provocative troll types. Not terribly interested in it.
Okay.
If you look at his Twitter profile, it's rather rather crazy. Let's just put it that way.
All right, that's good. He looks
no
to
pollution,
still be
Richard.
there.
No pollution.
No pollution.
Yeah. No pollution.
I would say this really quickly to answer the question seriously. While I was on a plane to Boston a couple of weeks ago, I watched this documentary that was like one of those ESPN 30 for 30 documentaries on the Lakers versus the Celtics rivalry. And it went through all the series, basically Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson, and really well done and pretty great. Although I think the NBA is unwatchable at this point. I just have really no interest in it. I think it's
I told you my view is that most professional athletics is fake, right? That's sort of been my frame over the last few years.
You need to come visit my good friend of mine who also has this view. It's even if it is, whether it's fake or not, I think the NBA is rather boring the way that it evolved into this kind of 3-point shooting contest, and just not very interesting. Okay, Raph, you're up.
Hey, first of all, it's really good to have you and Charles in here. I've learned many things with both of you, and I would like to respectfully ask the following question. Is it possible that you guys are underestimating the influence of the Vatican? We all know that Russia, Israel, Iran, they're all running these hostile foreign operations. But even though I don't know much about American politics, I was born in a well-connected Catholic family. I went to a private Catholic school, and I saw some very disturbing things from people that nowadays they are in Opus Dei, they are Knights of Malta. I understand the mentality of some of these people that are even connected to some of the political figures that Punished mentioned, some of the Latin American figures. I'd rather not be specific, but some of them who are very well known. And for me, what I've seen before leaving the church was an extremely powerful, not only a lobby, but groups such as the Opus Dei that they're not acting perhaps as intelligence services, but they have a network that
Oh, yes, they are.
acts in an
Oh, yes,
independent
they
way.
are. Oh, yes, they are acting as intelligence networks. No, they're
They
very.
are?
Yes, you're quite onto something, and I think it's quite good that the Pope himself, has been moving against Opus Dei and against the Knights of Malta. So
Yeah.
I think you're quite onto something. And I've always argued with my Opus Dei friends who are Catholic and whatnot. I've always said you can't be more Catholic than the Pope. And let's not forget who one of the most prominent Opus Dei people has been, which is Robert Hansen, the FBI traitor who worked on counterintelligence matters and who was very plugged in with the Israelis and the Russians. And so, yes, I think you're quite onto something, very much so.
And there's also, if I'm not, as far as I'm concerned, Clarence Thomas as well, the guy from the Supreme Court, right?
It's
He,
unclear if Clarence Thomas is or not, but he is a cooperator to them. So, yes, possibly.
yeah. And connecting to what Richard was talking about, the Hispanics, I know many Catholics that see the future of the church as in Latin America and Africa mostly because of the demographic growth. So I really would ask, at least in terms of the most traditionalist types of Catholics, like Nick Fuentes, the founder of Gap.com. Isn't it possible that some of the red pills that are being pushed are not just Israeli, Russians, but also by these kinds of people, because as far as I know, they do have a very complicated mentality. I mean, some of them are the most radicalized people I've met. A white nationalist, sometimes he just wants to live alone with his wife, but some of these traditional Catholics are extremely violent. They want to convert the whole world. It's a mentality that is very difficult to de-radicalize as they see it as their own purpose. And especially if you went to a private Catholic school, the kind of abuse that you go through, the kind of really weird stuff that happens there creates a bond, a loyalty that, I mean, I think it may be even stronger than what happens in cartels, which, by the way, many priests in Mexico are connected to the cartel.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think you're wrong about any of this, and I myself joined the Catholic Church to marry a woman who later divorced me. So I'm not the world's expert on things Catholic, but I have read quite a lot about Opus Dei and the history of the Knights of Malta, and I did share a piece up in the Jumbotron written by Arthur Bloom about how Chinese Opus Dei is, and I think you're quite right. There is this kind of like as the state becomes weaker, there are these sort of like religious and cartel things that kind of step into the void. And yes, I think the Pope has been very good at sort of tamping down some of these more crazy things. I mean, I think he's called Opus Dei a heresy, right? Which is like that's pretty intense. So I think you're quite onto something. And I myself, when I was looking at becoming Catholic, I fell in with the Opus Dei people, and they really are quite crazy. Like there's really something to what you're saying. So yeah, I think it's well taken.
yeah, and it's really really crazy what happens there. I mean, people don't even imagine. But just as a final note, even though I was Catholic, nowadays I have really bitter feelings, especially because I've realized the Vatican is sometimes very treacherous. For example, the U.S. had a very good relationship with the Vatican during the Cold War, but if you look at the history of the U.S. more broadly, things are not like that. So I discovered something really disturbing about the possible role of the Catholic Church in the assassination of Lincoln. And apparently, the church was very involved in the Civil War, and it seems like overall they always try to be on the side of their own interests, using agents that are very loyal in a way that I don't know if intelligence agencies can achieve that. I've never met one of those agencies,
Yes,
but
I myself on Easter Sunday went to a church that was funded by Mary Surratt, who was the last woman to be executed for sedition. So you're onto something there as well about the Catholic role in killing Lincoln. So very much, she was involved with the plot to assassinate the president. So very much on board there too.
yeah,
Well,
just
why don't
finally.
you hold on? I don't want you to make any more insinuations. Why don't you start naming some names here and tell us what you are suggesting?
So, in terms of the what happened with Lincoln,
No,
there's a
not
guy.
Lincoln. That sounds a bit too arcane. But what are you talking about right now with Opus Dei? Like, let's name some names and get specific about what you're alleging. Don't just kind of suggest that we wouldn't believe what's going on. Tell us what's going on.
Okay, I can tell you some things, but I can't tell you all because these people are very powerful, especially in the country that I am. But you can see, for example, a strong lobby even in the United States. Again, I don't know much about the politics right there, but for example, I can tell you for sure. And naming names is a complicated thing to do where I live, but I
Okay.
do know people
Where do you live?
in. I live in an undisclosed location at the moment. I can put it like this. But I do know that, for example, Pinochet, he was part of the Opus Dei. He was surrounded by them. A lot of what happens in Chile, a place that I was a couple of years ago, it's really tied to Opus Dei. They are all over the place. You
Yes,
see those.
let's not forget that Pinochet was very close with Milton Friedman and the whole Chicago Boys, who
Exactly.
and Milton Friedman's grandson, Patri Friedman, is very backed by Peter Thiel and involved in trying to promote these kind of like seasteading operations or independent countries or breakaway countries kind of operation. So yeah, I think you're onto something there, and I think it's well taken.
Yeah, and I wish I could be more specific, but some places in the world are run by the Opus Dei in a way or another.
Oh, I mean, El Salvador is very much that way. There are parts of Mexico, particularly Nuevo León, that are that way. Parts of Colombia are for sure that way. Brazil has all kinds of cartel and gang worlds that are basically controlled by the Bolsonaros, which is why the CIA and MI6 had to get in there and reinstall Lula. So yeah, I'm with you. I mean, se habla español, so like I've seen it. Like I know what's up. And I posted some stuff about, the granddaddy of Opus Dei in the United States, the sort of highest ranking person, who was, of course, Bill Barr. And I think it's quite interesting that he was drummed out of CIA for all kinds of weird China connections that he had. And then, of course, his father, Donald Barr, was a Lutheran, who was a Jew who became a Lutheran, who became a Catholic, which is quite odd. And then,
Yeah.
of course, he has a long history of connections with the organized crime world. And this was, what actually brought him into OSS, because they needed people who had connections to the organized crime world to deal with the invasion of Italy. Don Barr spoke fluent Italian despite being of Jewish pedigree. So I'm with you, Raph. I get it.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me do T Vic, and then I think I might call it a night. Fairly. Charles is now co-host, so he can keep going for a while. T Vic has left us. All right. uh, Sivik is back. Obvious, welcome.
Hey, g'day, Richard. How are you doing?
Good day.
G'day, mate. How you doing? That's not a knife. Alrighty. Yeah, I was just listening about an hour ago about syncretic terrorism, and what popped into my mind was all the terrorist attacks that popped up in Europe around 2014 to 2016. And it just seemed like every other month there was a major terrorist attack too. Like, it's not like one or two people. It's like the one in France with the automatic rifles, and was there one in Britain at a Ariane, like a female pop singer concert as well? Like
Ariana Grande.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in my mind, like, the average person's not able to get automatic weapons and explosives in those countries. Simple as that. So in my mind, when you guys started talking about syncretic terrorism, my mind just started ticking. Well, who's supplying these people with these arms? Who supplied them at the time with those arms and the materials to do that, and for what purpose? Maybe that ties into they wanted the right wing to come in, the Zionist right wing to come in Europe at that time. But that was just my two little cents. But I don't know what you guys think of it.
It's speculation, but
I think you're probably onto something. I mean, the Lockerbie bombing. There's been all sorts of interesting, weird stuff that we've learned about the Maltese connections there, and I myself have spent a great many hours perusing the Lockerbie stuff, and I must confess that, I've met quite a number of Libyans over the years, and I've never quite found a Libyan to be bright enough to plan a logistics operation of that magnitude. Let me just put it that way. And so, yeah, I think that there's lots of these terrorist attacks that are done, and that sometimes weaker powers or dumber powers are often scapegoated for them. And I think it's a very interesting thing that you mention. And I certainly, if you look at the role of terrorism and the role of hacking and the connections of those things, there's a lot of interesting activity in that regard. And I think we're going to see over the next 6 months to a year or so, as Hunter Biden makes people accountable for hacking him, that there is in fact a whole lot of this stuff going on against high profile targets in the West and in the United States especially.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Because ISIS would have been back like expatriates in Europe, like the second generation immigrants from Middle Eastern countries in Europe. They were attracted to ISIS. It was a very similar a connection there. Was that right? If say I'm a British second generation immigrant, and I see all this ISIS stuff coming up on my Facebook feed or whatever, however they get radicalized, and for whatever reason I can't get into Syria. I mean, and then you do a bombing or shooting or whatever they do.
I heard a British intelligence officer tell me that actually the British state was identifying a number of these people who were ISIS sympathetic and actually facilitating them going to Syria so that they could be killed, which I found to be quite an amazing solution to that problem. So, so I think you may be onto something that, in fact, the malcontents that were in Europe at the time, many of them were encouraged to go to Somalia or go to, now to Sudan, to go and fight, the jihad or whatever, and that now they're being whacked. And of course, we should also note that many of the Arab countries were financing some of this activity, namely the UAE, because the UAE, of course, benefits from both sides of that trade, where the UAE likes to have a sort of ISIS terrorist attack against our soldiers in Afghanistan so that we might stay in Afghanistan, right? And then, of course, they laundered the money for the various Afghan warlords that we bribe not to kill each other. So one of the great things, and Richard and I have talked about this before, one of the things that actually made me an enthusiastic Biden supporter rather than just a lukewarm one was the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the kind of breaking of this kind of bullshit politics where we are actually fighting over something quite significant, which is the fate of Europe and Ukraine. And it's not Americans who are doing it, but Europeans who are doing it with our equipment and support. So I'm very much of the view that what was going on in the 2014 period was there was a kind of effort to bring all these people up to destabilize Europe. And there was all sorts of people, far right parties and the like, that benefited from that sort of thing. So I think you're quite onto something.
Hail Biden, hail our people, right?
Yes.
To some extent, yes. To some extent.
Hail Biden, hail centrism, hail victory.
Unironically, yeah. Do you have time for an Irish joke, Richard? I understand.
Well, in order to celebrate the crowning of King Charles, yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Don't make it too bad like the last time.
It's not terrible. It's not great either.
Okay.
What's the strength of the Irish spirit?
Guinness.
Chris's Irish spirit. About 40% alcohol.
That's good. Yes.
That's not so bad.
All right.
That's not so bad. I will say Australia is a country of people designed to make you laugh and steal your girlfriend. So I'm a huge fan of it, just by nature. So I hope you guys deal with the whole Chinese problem.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you for joining us as always, Vic. Excuse me, Obvious. I confused you with the last speaker. Obvious. I'll start following you. We can get in touch on DMs. All right. Vic, you are up. I'm very curious about this one.
Hi, guys. So I'm new to the whole Spaces thing on Twitter. I didn't get a chance to talk in the last space that I was in. I'm sure that my content scared them off. But I just wanted to, I don't know the topic that you guys are discussing and whatnot. I just have information that I would love to share. I live I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, but I live in one of those corrupt counties that is surrounding Louisville, and it's known as Bullitt County, aka Shepherdsville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
I have had, we have KRS statues in place for a reason. I know that every state must have them. Kentucky Revived Statue is what it stands for here. Now, I have 2 children. I was married for the past 10 years, from the age of 22 until 30, and I'll be 32 in September. I've been happily divorced for the past 2 years. And again, you know what I'm saying? Okay, but 2 children. I have no record. I've never been in trouble. I've never been dependent on a substance, so to speak. I am a huge marijuana advocate, though. I think that if everybody would just smoke a joint, we might live in a happier world. But besides that, all jokes aside, I have had my rights violated. I'm talking my civil. I know the constitutional rights are more for our government to follow, as well as our KRS statues, or revived statues, depending on where you're at, I guess. So once I started realizing what was done to me was absolutely absurd, I started doing some research. I had spent money on an attorney, which I know now that attorneys are not for you. I don't care if it's your best friend from grade school, they are not for you. Color of law, people of color, they have oaths that they follow along with our judges. I realized that it is nothing but a corporation, it is nothing but a bank. A judge is merely just the referee.
So, yeah.
What was done to you exactly? I mean, what?
Oh.
All right. We lost her. Yeah. I don't. Okay. I'm not sure I'm that interested. I mean, what is she talking about?
I have no idea what she's talking about. So let's just let's let sleeping dogs lie on this one.
Lawyers do suck, but
lawyers do suck. And I think Richard and I are both happily divorced, though not from each other. So,
All right.
Yes.
I'm going to do this, guys. Charles, do you want to continue the space? I think
if people want, I mean, why don't you just leave your phone? Because I know if you're the host and you leave, the whole thing gets shut down. So.
Well, you're now the co-host. I mean, I can leave my phone going. Well,
leave your phone going, but I think the way it works is that as the host, you can shut it down. If you shut it down, the whole thing gets shut down.
I see. I'll
And we
leave
have
my
quite a
phone on. I remember
so
one
yes,
time last December or something, I left my phone on all night, and you guys, we did like the longest space ever. It was like at
yeah, like
least 12
17
hours.
hours or something. Got
Yeah.
like that. We won't do that tonight because I have a breakfast meeting and I'm an adult and I get up early on Mondays, though for my sufferance. But
Yes.
we'll maybe go another hour or so if people are inclined, because I'm a little jazzed up about this topic of right-wing death squads, mass violence, and I mean this is my jam, as you know, Richard. So I appreciate you
Yes.
organizing this sort of thing.
Definitely, it's real.
It's
All right, guys. I will. I'm going to put myself on mute, and I might check back in at some point. But so long for now. All right. Talk to you later.
Sayonara, Richard. Yes, I know that I thought I might bring back up Punished, because I know Punished has quite a number of things to say on these topics, and I know that we had our friend earlier that was onto this stuff as well, our sort of Hispanic friend. So if he's interested in coming back, there are quite a number of like weird troll accounts that are coming in here, and I don't mind you coming in and listening, like no problems there. But you know, some of your accounts are really quite grotesque and kind of like weird and disturbed, and some of you, like, I'm not going to bring a stripper up on stage. No disrespect meant to the stripper community. I wish you all the very best, but probably not in this space, not on this topic. No harm, no foul, as it were. So bring up Dana, and let's see. And by the way, if you want to speak, if you would just message me what you want to talk about, because I see we have like 7 or 8 people that want to speak, and I can't possibly accommodate all of you. But yeah, I will bring you up if you so elect. I will bring you up. If I don't know you already, just do please message me and tell me what you want to speak about. Yeah, we could well talk about the whole Michael Flynn lawsuit against Jim Stewartson. That might well be interesting. Do you want to give us a blow by blow on that, Dana? I know you've been kind of following it to some extent. For those who are unfamiliar, Jim Stewartson is a kind of unwell gentleman in Los Angeles. I really don't know how I first learned of him, but he's sort of been a very kind of cringe character. I believe he's some sort of unemployed video game developer or something to that effect. I don't quite know, but he seems to be terribly obsessed with me. That might be too parochial a topic, but he's also very obsessed with Mike Flynn, and General Mike Flynn actually turned, and sued him. And of course, there's all sorts of weird stuff with Mike Flynn as well, which we can maybe sort of, mention as well. But it's one of those situations where it's a pity that both sides don't lose. Is kind of my impression of it. But yeah. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know. And I can also bring up Tom as well, because I know Tom likes to speak on these issues. But let's go to our white idolater person. I don't know. It does look like you have quite some edgy stuff on your profile, sir. But if you behave yourself, I will let you speak. And if you don't behave yourself, I will get rid of you. So go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Marginally. Try to boost your audio, and you'll get a second bite at the apple.
Oh, what that woman was alleging was sovereign citizen talk. I just wanted to say, and that has no legal basis whatsoever. It's total baloney.
Well, people are entitled to all kinds of craziness, though we prefer that they not inflict it upon the rest of us. Private indulgence of the insane is something I'm well familiar with, but I try to keep it at a minimum when I'm speaking in public. Though sometimes I fail there, and it seems like she failed there as well. But yeah, go ahead.
It's just terrible legal advice, and if you follow it, you'll get yourself into more trouble than it's worth. It's basically the legal version of putting salt on your wound, and if all that stuff worked, state legislators would have just closed the loopholes decades ago.
Where the hell did Charles go?
It looks like he was booted down, but he's coming back. But he won't be
Well,
host.
Charles was the co-host, and Richard Spencer, the host. He made Charles the host, so we're in a situation right now.
Well, he can speak. He's right
Oh, that's
beside
true.
you.
That is true. Hey, Charles. Hello there.
Chuck.
Uh-huh.
I
Well,
see him.
Dana, he asked you to he was about to ask you to give some insight. Forgot about what specifically. I think it was regarding
He was asking about Jim Stewartson.
Oh, Jim Stewartson. So what do you know about that?
Enough, but not comfortable to talk about it too much because these people are batshit crazy. I'd prefer Charles be in this room talking with us about it because I'd rather him kind of say it and then I can nod and fill in what I'm comfortable with because it's dangerous stuff.
Charles is about to start another space. He just messaged
Okay, perfect.
me.
Let's do that. That sounds good.
Cool.
I'd just rather talk with him on it so that.
Yes.
All right, good. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, is anyone still listening to this? Has everyone left the space?